All right, so today's episode of Design Corner is all about weaving together a mystery. So last week we talked about how you can present the mystery to your players, the ways and tools in which you can make sure that all of the preparation that you do doesn't either result in the players getting frustrated or not being able to figure out where the mystery is going, and also how to make sure that you didn't prep a whole bunch of stuff that then never gets used because they never latched onto that one plot thread that you thought they would have hooked onto in the same manner. But if you don't have a mystery to start with, well, developing a mystery that is complex and has a bunch of twists and turns, which is especially necessary if you're playing a game like Deadlands Noir or any sort of hard-boiled game where you need to have everything be connected to everything because it needs to be complex, because wading through all of the ways that this mystery is intertwined with things that don't seem relevant and things that do seem relevant, and the red herrings that are there, and the surprises that you come along the way, all of those elements, it can be somewhat daunting to sit down and think, what is all that stuff? A couple of great examples of noir stories that folks might not be that folks can use as examples, right? I always You can go back to the classics. Things like Chinatown is a great example of a great noir. Well, it's a hard boiled story. And just so folks know what terms we're using and in what context, a noir story is one in which somebody goes into the seedy underbelly, into a world that they are not familiar with, and they, generally speaking, do not survive the encounter, right? These are your average Joes getting sucked into a world that is not their own. And discovering that world and often not surviving it is kind of the heart of noir. Then you have hard boiled, where it's the same thing, except the protagonist is an inhabitant of this world, right? Your private eyes and whatnot, that they know the players, they know how to play the game. And it's not so much how the story is about how they're going to ultimately succumb to this underground world, but rather it is about the pain and suffering that they experience along the way. So Jake Gittes in Chinatown is a hard-boiled detective, right? He was a cop, now he's just a PI, and he's entangled into this mystery, and it's all about the physical pain that he's going to go through, the emotional pain, the tension between the people that he cares about and the people that are trying to stop him from finding out the mystery. Other great examples, if you're more on the sci-fi TV show bent, Altered Carbon, that first season is absolutely a hard-boiled story. It's all about, it's a murder investigation, and then everything else is coming off from points that you're not going to expect. If you're, there's one other example that I was going to use, and it has escaped me. But so you have a mystery that you want to present to your players, right? And generally speaking, generally speaking, we are going to be telling hard-boiled, twists and turn type stories with mysteries because our players are generally going to be competent. Sometimes you might be running in a war game where you've got a bunch of average people going in, and that is kind of the initial precept of East Texas University, where they're average college students and they get sucked into this alternate world. Though East Texas University isn't really a noir story, it's more of your standard face mystery, right? There's something that we don't understand and we're trying to understand it. And the twists and turns aren't as much a complex weave of all of the different elements that go in and how everything is connected, but rather just going through and accounting for all the wrong information, right? In a standard mystery like that, you're going to have a lot more, not even just red herrings of, this seemed like it was the answer, but it's actually this other thing. It's more just your characters not having enough information to draw a conclusion. And so of the four conclusions that they have, three of them are wrong, and we slowly throughout the course of the mystery get rid of those three conclusions until we have the one right one. Whereas in a noir and a hard-boiled mystery, you don't have a conclusion. I mean, you might have one conclusion at various points, and that conclusion is basically always wrong until you get to the end and you see the full puzzle. So if you're looking at a blank page, that is the hardest place to start developing your mystery. And realistically, you're very rarely actually going to be looking at a blank page because you're generally going to know the setting that you're running in, right? If you're playing Deadlands Noir, then you have all the setting background that we provide you in the book for, these are the players and these are the places, and you have all of those items. If you're rolling your own setting, then you've probably already done some of your own work to figure out, okay, who are the people in this area and what are the organizations and what are the conflicts and things like that, right? But if you are starting with a pure blank page, right, you don't have a setting in mind, you're just starting to roll your own and you need to prep it for the mystery. This is actually the boat I'm currently in. I haven't had a chance to prep the next game I'm running for my virtually now in-person group, where we're going to be playing a cyberpunk hard-boiled game. And I wanted to roll my own cyberpunk setting just because nobody in the group is so in love with one setting or the other that it would make sense to play in that. And also, I'm a writer and a designer. I'm much more interested in the nonsense I come up with than other folks' stuff. So I am looking at a blank page with there. And so the first thing that I need to figure out, right, because you can spend a lot of time working on this stuff of like the macro behind the scenes stuff that the players are likely never to interact with, in which case you're not getting a lot of value out of it. Or you can start with what are the players going to see? What are the things that are going to affect them? And so these are the 4 items that we have on our page in front of us. They're the contacts and NPCs they're going to interact with, any important items they're going to interact with, any important events that are happening, have happened, or are going to happen, and then how those things are connected. And so I will throw out, so a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about with this, if you take any sort of classes or pick up any books on how to write mysteries and things like that, right? These are all literary tools that have existed for a long period of time. The first time I ever saw them introduced in the context of a game was in a game called Tech Noir, which is a cyberpunk noir style game. I find the rule set not it's a more like narrative rules light version of like a Savage Worlds type rule set, right? Where you've got target numbers and things like that. And they've got their own version of basically bennies that you have to spend in order to be able to like actually do lasting damage. You have to spend it and you give it to the GM. And so now the GM has tools to start damaging your characters. And so it's kind of the damage economy starts with the players and then moves to the GM and then comes back to the players. Which I'll be honest, I'm not a super big fan of that part of the rule set just because it meant the players never did anything lasting because they didn't want to give the GM ways to damage them. But they did present they had these setting packets and they presented in table forms your contact. It was NPCs, it was individual enemy organization, or it was individual enemies / groups of enemies, like literally like an encounter. Organizations, like events like movie premieres and hurricanes and things like that, of just like things that happen in the world, and items, right? Basically the various MacGuffins that you would have. And when I was reading it, I was like, oh, I've never seen somebody take these literary tools and just turn it into roll on a couple of tables and generate this. So if you kind of want a taste of this without having to write everything yourself and generate it like we are about to do here, then you can go and check out Tech Noir. Wherever you generally get your RPG products, I'm sure they're on there. And that way you have a working example as opposed to the one that we're going to come up with here. Or again, you can pick up basically any book that you're going to pick up on how to write mysteries, and for any medium is going to have that same tool just in a literary tool format. But so we've got kind of the things that what are your players going to do in a session, right? They're going to talk to people. They are going to fight things. They are going to go to places. They are going to get things, and things are going to happen, right? And so that's a very generic list, but instead of trying to figure out everything that's going to be in this mystery, we can start with those 5 things, right? So we can start with our contacts and our NPCs because I think that's generally speaking the easiest thing for us to wrap our heads around. We spend basically our entire lives trying to understand people and achieve and succeeding in various degrees. And so I think that's often a great place for us to start. So if I turn that off and turn this on, there we go. Okay. So you folks should, yep, okay, there it is in the preview. So I'm going to be looking over here because it's on my second monitor. So I personally recommend, and again, if you jump into the literary tools section in books and whatnot, a flowchart, some sort of diagram is the first thing that most folks are going to tell you how to build a mystery. So that's what we're going to do here. I am using a app for Google Drive called I actually don't know. It's so when I got it, it was Draw.io, and it still is a .draw.io file extension, but the URL is diagrams.net. So look for Draw.io or diagrams.net. You'll get this resource. It's free. If you have access to the Office suite, then you can also do this in Visio. I just wanted to use an option that was free for everybody, so that way you didn't, it wasn't gated behind, oh, I got to go buy Microsoft Office to be able to do this. So the first thing we should do, but I'm not going to do it because I don't want to take up too much time on it, is build a key. But just note those things that we were talking about, right? People, events, items, connections. We would set up a key for, let's say our circle is, and I guess I could do it super quickly. I just wouldn't make it. I have a very high standard of what my diagram should look like. That's because I worked for many years as a designer in video games, and well-defined diagrams makes it so that the team can get their job done faster. But we will call circles people. We'll use some rounded boxes for items. We will use the hexagon. And there's also, you can find online, there are actual like flowchart rules of these are the different things that you should use for flowcharts. I never much cared for them because nobody ever really spends a whole lot of time going and learning those. We will call this events. And thinking about it, actually, locations, the reason I originally omitted locations from the list of bullets is that at the end of the day, you care what's in that location more than the location itself. And so who's at that location, what's at that location, what happens at that location is way more important than the location itself. And that's something that I think for the most part we can come up on the fly pretty easily, especially because you can have a very vague description of a location and your players will get it, right? So these are the 3 items that we're working with to begin with. And I very much like, especially in stories like this, to go from what do the players know, and then go into what do they not know. And so the first thing that I would start with is I'm going to start with introducing a couple of people. So let's say I have 4 players. Well, if I have 4 players, I probably want at least 2 people per player. Let's say we have 3 players, just so we have a fewer examples to come up with. Now, when you're doing this, you're probably going to want to come up with actual names and descriptions of what they look like and personalities and things like that. But for our purposes, that's a level of detail that you don't need to kind of grasp what we're talking about. So we're going to focus entirely on how these people can be leveraged, right? What are they? So it would make sense that at least one of our players knows a fixer. So we'll have the fixer. So a fixer is somebody that, especially in the criminal sense, a fixer is somebody that you contact when you need people to do a job, right? So I want to put a crew together for a heist to go into a bank and get the security deposit box, so that way I have some blackmail information. I would go to a fixer and say, I need you to put together a crew to get this done, right? They're the intermediary between the client and the people doing the work. In a corporate sense or a private business sense, a fixer is somebody that when an issue pops up, they know the people that they need to talk to solve this issue, and they themselves can often solve it, right? So, for instance, a great example is if you ever watched season 2 of Jessica Jones, her friend becomes a fixer for a lawyer, and so when he gets a call that their client, a alcoholic footballer, has gotten into another car accident with somebody, he goes over there. He has the legal document. He talks to the person that he's rammed into and says, "Hey, you can take his car if you agree not to tell anybody that this happened, and then I'm going to take this drunk guy and get him into a." I don't think he took him to a rehab facility. I think he just took him like home and thought and not thawed him out, dried him out, so that way he was no longer drunk, and gave him an alibi, so that way nobody could ever say, "Oh, you got into this hit and run accident." That's the type of stuff that a fixer can do, or they're putting together a team for it. So it would make sense that one of our players might be the person that a fixer calls on to get some work done. Again, this is kind of thinking of it more in the noir side story rather than the mystery story. You might have a fence, right? We have some stolen goods. We need to sell it. The fence is the person who can put us into contact. And also, I'll kind of dip into this now because the first two examples have come up with this. We're thinking on one ring of separation, right? So if I make a quick diagram, we've got our players. Oh, and then in this next one, oh, that's not. And then how do I forget. Let me just make a separate text object. Oh. It would help if I didn't hold that shift key for one second longer than I need to. So we've got our different rings, right? We've got our players, and then actually we got our players, and then their direct contacts, and then those contacts have contacts, right? And so we can also keep that in mind when we're building this stuff out. How easy? Okay, it looks large enough to be understandable. Um, actually, let me. I don't think you really need to see. Let me unlock that. I don't think you really need to see the sidebars and such. So let me modify this on the fly, just so it's a little. I can make it a little bigger and it'll be a little easier to see. All right, yeah, that looks way easier to see. So you can also think about when you're prepping this stuff, kind of beyond the format that we're going of thinking about it in this web of who connects to what. You can also think of it as spheres, right? Your players have the contacts that they have, and then those contacts have contacts. And you don't need to know who, beyond those direct contacts, you don't need to know in the moment before you're playing who these secondary contacts are, right? For some folks, it might be super worthwhile to take some time and to think about all those people, especially if you're not as comfortable with improving that stuff. But personally, I have no difficulty coming up with characters and personalities and motivations on the fly. I do often. I have a very. I'm very persnickety when it comes to names. I want names that feel authentic and sound authentic, and I do spend a lot of time on names. So what I will do is have like a sticky note or a document somewhere that has a whole bunch of names. So that way, when I introduce somebody, I can grab from that list, use that name, and then I just strike it from the list, and maybe I'll make a note of what person was this name. But if our players aren't directly interacting with those contacts, we don't actually need to know who they are, right? We can have as little detail as we have for right here, right? The fence has clients. So we know that out in these secondary contexts, they've got a whole bunch of clients. And the reason that is valuable for us in our mystery is because sometimes we want to let our players go down a thread that doesn't get them, to the next clue, but does get them kind of a little bit more context, a little bit more information, right? It's especially useful if they aren't trusting their direct contacts. Oh yeah, sorry, Lone Jedi. This is a surprise. We realized that the end of the study abroad campaign, we're doing a closeout live stream tomorrow, and that's at the same time. So we had to bump this one to today. In the future, they'll be on Thursdays. Did not think about that at the end of the last one and warn folks. But so the secondary contacts, just thinking about keeping that in mind, right? You don't need to think about it more than this little diagram. You don't need to be like, okay, now let me create I've added the fence, so now let me make a list of all of the people that the fence has as a secondary contact. Don't worry about that, but just keep in mind that at any point in your game, that's a lever you can pull, and you can introduce a new character from there, and that kind of helps you with the structure of who should they know. So we'll move that over here somewhere. Oh, it didn't grab everything. We'll move that over here out of the way so we can reference it later if need be. Okay, so we've got our fixer, we've got our fence, we probably need a doctor. Probably it's going to be useful for our players to know probably an information broker. If depending on the setting, again, if I'm kind of right now in the back of my head always thinking about the cyberpunk game that I'm gonna prep and run for my group. What is useful there? Well, a hacker, and maybe this is a very two of these are almost certainly criminals. Three of them maybe. The information broker might be a criminal, might not. The doctor, they could be a legit doctor, they could be a street doctor. But maybe we should throw somebody in here that's legitimate. So, a business owner, right? What business? Don't know. Don't need to know yet. But so these are the contacts that my players are going to start with, right? They are going to. I've got two for every player. So maybe each player gets to select two, and maybe they select two of the same. But so I've got a couple of people to start with, and then now I got to think about, okay, what are some items that might come up and might be important? And again, this is kind of it's a random shotgun spread, right? You don't want all of your items to be related. You want them to be disparate parts because we don't know how we're going to use these tools yet, right? With our people, we knew that these needed to be useful for our players. So if our players get injured, they go to the doctor. If they have something that they need to sell, they go to the fence. If they need to get access to something that is online that they don't have legal access to, they'll go to the hacker, right? If they need an introduction to somebody, they'll go to their fixer. But with the items, they probably shouldn't have a direct connection to our players because more so than this initial group of people, they are the random elements that we're going to throw into our mystery that is going to kind of help make things seem interesting. So let's not go too crazy, right? We're trying to just prep what we need and not a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's go ahead and do 4 items. Now, with 4 items, you've got basically whatever inspires you, you can utilize, right? So earlier I was talking about some examples of mysteries and noir stories, right? That you might kind of draw from as influence. So why don't we say, right? The thing that always comes to mind when I think about what are these random kind of MacGuffin items that we can introduce, so that way our players they're an element that will be important to the mystery. I always think about the case from Pulp Fiction, right? So we can just literally say the case. Don't know what's in it, don't know who it's important to, just know that there is a case and it could be important. We could also say, right, again, I'm thinking in a very cyberpunk fashion, so let's move away from that. What's something that we could throw out there? A truck. Let's call it a semi. There's a semi. Is that semi filled with something? Who knows? Maybe. Is it just the cab of the semi? Is it a semi with a trailer that's filled with a whole bunch of medical supplies? Don't know. Don't need to know. We're going to discover that later. Let's say a murder weapon. That's always good. Who killed it? Who got killed? Who did the killing? Oh, don't know, but we'll find out in a minute. And you know what? Super emblematic of noir stories and such, a matchbook, right? Oh, I don't know why I find it difficult to look at the screen and type. Like if I'm just regularly typing on the screen in front of me, I could type without looking at the keyboard. But on the second screen, I got to look at the keyboard. Don't know why. All right, and then events. Right. Let's keep going with our trend of making less work for ourselves as we go. So let's go ahead and just do 2 events. Now, again, these are not things that need to connect to the rest of our story. We actually don't want them to, because the juice, right? The things that's going to interest our players, going to make them think, and going to make them and kind of make our mystery feel real is the fact that these things don't have an obvious inset connection, right? We want our players, as they're going through this mystery, to feel like this stuff is coming out of nowhere, and that there is no master plan. If you were doing like, I wouldn't necessarily use this format for something like if I was making a Riddler type character in a superhero game, because you do want everything to feel like it's been indoctrinated together and that everything is being moved by a puppet master, and you want all those elements to have a clear connection. But in a more typical mystery, not necessarily. So why don't we say a missing boat, right? That could be a yacht, it could be a fishing boat, it could be whatever. But so a boat goes missing. Well, actually, let's. It's an event, so let's write it as how you would describe an event. So a boat goes missing. That's something that if you write about an element in the way that you're going to talk about it, it makes it kind of easier to think about and to then further utilize. So we have a boat that goes missing, and then what's another event? And of course, folks, if you're in chat and you have a suggestion, feel free to throw it out there. And if it fits, then we'll drop it in. But so another event, what's something that doesn't really connect to anything else we have going on? You know what? A parade. A parade is always good. So at this point, we've kind of got our tool set, right? We've got a couple of characters, we've got a couple of people, NPCs that our players are going to have some sort of connection to. We've got a couple of items that we can drop in at any point. And then we have 2 events that will somehow be important to this mystery that we're crafting. So where you go from here, it's kind of up to you and how random you want it to be, right? So, for instance, again, I referenced Tech Noir earlier. The way that they did it was they put everything into a table, and they had you roll on the table. And I think there was also something about if the event was connected or unconnected, but that was how they told you where to drop things on the map. That random element can inspire a lot of creativity. It can, especially, figuring out, like, I had no idea how these 2 elements were going to connect. Now I got to figure it out because they have to, because the randomness determined that. But I don't necessarily need that prompt. I feel pretty confident that I can make something. Oh, it cuts off a little. That's interesting. Let me fix that. I don't know why it is doing that. Sorry, 1 second. I just noticed that. Huh? I see. Okay, I see how this is working. That's why it's now cut off. Okay, never mind. So let's just take, what, actually a fixer is the obvious choice. So let's go with the least obvious choice, right? The business owner is the first element of our thing of stuff. So let me there we go. Now we got a whole bunch of space on the bottom. So we are going to start with our business owner. So our business owner, let's say that they have a connection to the doctor, right? There's a connection between the business owner and the doctor. So what I can do is I can create a little arrow here, and actually I'm gonna give myself a little bit more space. And so we've got the business owner, and we've got this doctor character, and you know what? The business owner is a patient. All right. So, oh, come on, center up. All right, it being centered is not super important. But so the business owner is a patient of the doctor, right? And this is also, you can kind of, if I were thinking a little bit more, I would, again, when I was making that key that I didn't make that I was talking about earlier, I would have kind of figured out what language do I use in each of these different types of objects. So that way, as I draw connections, I can use natural language to describe them, right? But so the business owner is a patient of the doctor, right? And how is that important to our mystery? We're not sure yet. But what if we say that there's a murder weapon, right? And let's say that's connected to our doctor. And our doctor has the murder weapon, has a murder weapon, right? Has a murder weapon. Maybe not the murder weapon. It might not be the integral murder weapon of our mystery. But you can start to see how we just took a couple of elements that we had, and we've already started figuring out a relationship between these elements. Again, this is where if you don't look at these and start to see where the puzzle pieces can start to interlock, then that's where adding some randomization in. I could have said, well, I've got 6 of these, so I'm going to roll a d6, and that's how it's going to be connected, right? Or I've got 3 categories, I'm going to roll a d6 on a 1 or a 2. I select from this. If I get a 3 or a 4, I select from this. If I have a 5 or a 6, I select from this. But I just kind of I've done this enough that I've got a kind of a flavor and a taste for it, and I know what I'm looking for. So I'm grabbing the elements as I find them interesting. And you know what? Is so far we've just got that they're a patient and they have a murder weapon. What makes a murder weapon interesting? Well, the fact that they killed somebody. So now this what I'm about to suggest can be a little risky. Let's actually put it over here because I'm from the outset of this mystery saying that I'm going to deny one of my players an access to one of their contacts, but the murder weapon killed the fixer. So now, not only do I have, now we've got some drama, right? The fixer has been killed, and that was at least one of the player's contacts. Now we also have the into our mystery, right? If you think about any classic dime store noir story, the way the investigator, the gumshoe, gets involved is they have somebody come to them and they pay them for a job, and then somebody else comes to them trying to find out what happened on that job or trying to pay them for a different job because they were, somehow involved, right? And excuse me, the most stereotypical noir thing that you'll see is the investigator has a beautiful woman come to him and ask for his help, and he probably turns her down initially, but then sees something that indicates that she's way in over her head, and because she's to use the parlance of the time, a gorgeous dame, he's going to help her out, right? That doesn't have to be the vein by which we hook in our players, but that is super stereotypical. We can we can use that or not. All right, it depends on the type of story that we're telling. If I was playing a Deadlands noir game, I'd probably use that because kind of the part of the juice of Deadlands noir is it's supposed to be very much your classic noir story. For my cyberpunk game, probably not going to be that just because that's not as important to the genre. But so now we know that the doctor has the murder weapon that killed the fixer. And I'm going to jump in. And you know what? I don't necessarily want any of these folks. Again, they're contacts for the player. I don't necessarily want to leverage them to be the villain that killed the fixer because now we've got two contacts for our players that they're losing. So let's go ahead and add in a new character. And you know what? What's a fun? Oh, oh, I keep expecting the line to know, but no, now it's in the input text. So actually, why doesn't somebody from chat just throw out a person, a title for a person, kind of in the same vein, a business owner, a doctor, right? What's a person that we could include in our mystery? Oh, okay. Grum Molotok. That's a great person to throw in, a taxi driver. So let's throw in a taxi driver. And so the taxi driver and the case and the fixer are all going to somehow be connected. And actually, let's make this a little more complex. The business owner wants the case. And actually, can't I feel like I can. How do I let it edit? Oh, here we go. What? What? Why are you over there? Okay, one moment. Let's try this again. So our business owner wants the case, and let's go ahead and clean this up real quick. Now that I remembered, I can put text. How do I make it do text though? Double clicking it does not seem to be. Uh, there we go. text is all getting awfully small. Let's zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier to see. So I'm just going to clean this up real quick because I realized once I start dragging things around to resize it, make it easy to move around and follow, it's going to get uh, it's going to get a little bit hard to follow. All right, so we've got the business owner wants the case, and the taxi driver has the case. And the taxi driver uh now I gotta was killed by the so now we got to make sure we read this in the way that the lines are presenting, right? So the business owner is a patient of the doctor. A doc let's do the doctor. The doctor has the murder weapon. The murder weapon killed the fixer, which is tenuously true. Uh, oh, actually, that's a better idea. Colin 1012. I had the idea that the case is a briefcase owned by the fixer left in the cab. Has the case, so we can. Of the owner of the case. And then we can just delete this line. Go ahead and move that down. Okay, see now it's retaining that association. So let's move that there just so it's a little easier to read. So we know the business owner is a patient of the doctor. The doctor has the murder weapon. The murder weapon killed the fixer. We don't know who killed the fixer quite yet. The fixer is the original owner of the case. The business owner wants the case, and the taxi driver has the case. Right? So we don't know why the business owner wants the case. But at this point, we've got a lot of people and items. Why don't we grab one of our events? And a boat has gone missing. And what we can do with that is we can say the missing boat. Shift this up. Right. Unstable Disk said, FYI, this data representation is very similar to a structure known as the semantic net. Yeah. Earlier in the episode, I talked about how this is basically you can find no end of narrative tools that on if you or sorry no end of books on writing mysteries and things like that. You will find basically the same tool. It is it's not I'm not reinventing the wheel here, but I don't think a lot of people think about this in terms of how to generate the mystery for their game. Uh, if you're a writer writing mystery novels, you don't need my advice on how to take that into your game. So now we're starting to get a little bit more of a tangled web, but part of the thing that we're going to want, especially in a very noir style story, is we want everything to connect to everything. We also want a couple of dead ends that don't really matter, right? So why don't we also say, right, because this can be a good connection, that were shipped by the boat, right? So the doctor needs medical supplies that were shipped by the boat that went missing. And Actually, that were I think my why is that not? So this is actually going to be a little more interesting than the supplies that the boat shipped the doctor needs. The doctor needs stuff that's on the boat because now the doctor needs to find the boat, right? There, perhaps they have some sort of client that has a very specific disease or injury or whatever, and they need some medical supplies that are on that boat. And so, in order to be able to meet the requirements of their patient, they need somebody to find the boat, right? That also gives us another way for our players to get hooked into the mystery, right? We have maybe one or two players that had the fixer as a contact, hear they're dead, and want to find out what happened to my contact. We have another player that has the doctor as a contact, and the doctor comes to them and says, "Hey, I ordered these medical supplies. They're super rare. This boat was bringing them in, and the boat's gone. It's disappeared. Or that maybe they don't even know that the boat's disappeared. Right? Let the player find that out. They haven't arrived yet. I need you to find out what's happening. When I go down to the docks and try and find out, or I call my distributor or whatever, I don't get any information. I need you to investigate this for me." And so now we've got a way for, if you remember the design corner we did on getting our players, starting our game and getting our players together, one of the tools that we talked about was having the convergent threads. And this is especially great for a mystery, right? Because now I can have a player that knows the doctor, does all of the investigating to find out that the medical supplies were on the boat. We can add in a little more complexity and say that the why did that not connect? We can say that the business owner owns the boat. So that can be something that our player has figured out about the boat. The business owner owns it. They talk to the business owner. They go down to the docks and they find out that the boat is missing. And they have that part of the puzzle. And then our other players, right, who know the fixer, well, maybe one of our players goes down the line of finding out that the fixer had this important case with them the day that they were murdered, and they're looking for that case, and they find out that the taxi driver had the case because they go and talk to the taxi driver's boss, but the taxi driver's disappeared, right? And that's also something that we can actually, we don't even need to edit the event, add another event. We can just say that the taxi driver is missing, and we've added a little bit more drama, a little bit more mystery, a little more something something for our players to find out. And so that player has found out that the taxi driver has the case, but the taxi driver has gone missing. And we, at this point, right, in the first session, probably don't even need to know why is the taxi driver missing. We just know it's dramatic, right? It adds tension and drama. But we don't know why they're missing. We can prep that for the next session, right? And then the other player finds out that the finds out what murdered the fixer, and maybe they find out that the doctor has the murder weapon, and maybe right, we can say maybe the murder weapon was given to the doctor by the business owner, right? And so now there's this little circle, and this little circle is actually going to be fairly important for two reasons. One, it gives our players multiple points in which that they can kind of find out this nugget, this fact, right? If you think back to last week, this is a fact. The business owner is a patient of the doctor and gave the doctor the murder weapon that killed the fixer, right? This is a useful piece of information. The players are probably going to need to know this in order to understand the whole mystery. Well, oh, we could, I don't know what symbol to use. Let's use let's use, oh, come back. Let's use this diamond. And we can just call that a clue, right? We can just note that if I make this big and I send it to the back, and let's make it orange, right? Actually, it would make more sense for this to be a big box because then I could do this. Oh, how do I make you? I guess if I use the rectangle, it probably won't constrain me to. Yeah, there we go. And again, if I had a key, I wouldn't even need to mark it. I could just know that if it's behind a red box, then it's one big clue, right? And so then I can say, well, that's not really part of that clue, and neither is that it killed the fixer. Or maybe actually that part is important. And so I can say my players need to find, this is one of the pieces of information that my players need to find out, right? How do they find out that information? Do they find that information out by going and interrogating the business owner? By going down to the morgue that the doctor runs, maybe, right? Or whatever, and talking through and looking through the evidence, whatever that mechanism might be, right? We can use the tools we talked about last week in order to make sure the players find out that part of the mystery. But we also kind of have this roadmap, right? And the scale of how we think about what is a clue can change, right? We can think about this entire thing is one important clue, and I expect my players to figure this all out from a single scene. Well, if that's the case, now we can refine this a little bit and say, well, are they really going to find out that the doctor the business owner is a patient of the doctor and gave the doctor the murder weapon all from this one thing? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I need to move some of these pieces around so that way it makes more sense that they could find out all this information in one scene. Or I could say, oh, actually, just this, just that is a clue I expect them to find in the scene. And the reason this also becomes useful, besides knowing that this is what my players are going to find out, and kind of having that being a floating element that we are then going to let them come across, it lets me figure out how long it's going to take my players to play through this mystery, right? Because some scene that they do needs to give them this information. And if I go through and I have, again, this isn't going to make much sense because I'm not actually mapping it out. Oh, right. Maybe this is all. So again, this isn't a whole piece and it's not a complete mystery, but for our purposes, right? I've mapped it out, and there are these 3 scenes that my players are going to need to get through. Well, again, unless they're a brand new group and you're not used to playing with them, you're probably going to develop an idea, especially if you think. Again, I can tell you exactly how many scenes my group is going to get through of any game that we play in a single session, because I've been building now my games in the blocks of scenes for years. So I know that my group can get through about 4 scenes in a single session, right? About 1 scene an hour. That's not to say they just do 4 things in a session, but between what they do in that scene, the connective tissue between the scenes, looking up rules, realizing that somebody did something wrong and having to backtrack, just the chit chat that happens, breaks to grab a snack or go to the bathroom. We're going to get through about 4 scenes, about 1 an hour. Well, I know right now, oh, this is a single session's worth of stuff that I have prepared. And the other way that this becomes useful, not just in, okay, I know it's going to take, 4 weeks for my players to get through this mystery, but I know, well, if I just prepare these 3 scenes, then I'm done, right? I don't need to spend 20 hours this week building out the whole adventure and the whole mystery and everything. And now I've got, I've got a lot of work that I've got to do in the week. I've only got so many hours to prep. Let me prep this stuff. And the fact that I don't know where this is going, I don't know what the ultimate resolution of this is, isn't that big a deal. Because I'm just going to do the same thing next week. And eventually I'm going to hit a point where it seems right to round off the corners and close it down. And again, I could, if I spend a whole bunch of time, I can make the whole tangled web and then start thinking about, okay, what do I need in the first session? What are the 3 or 4 scenes that I need in the first session so that way my players have content to get through, but I don't have to prep the entire tangled web. That's how I find this to be an incredibly valuable tool. And the other thing that I highly recommend is once you know the 5 or 6 elements that you're going to need for that first session, focus just on those elements, right? You're going to be very tempted to, okay, well, I'm talking about the business owner, but then I'm going to talk, but then I also this case is coming up, and maybe I should spend some time and go and focus on this case. You don't need to know, right? You're going to have enough if you've planned it out this way, you're going to have enough stuff to go through that just knowing that there is a case, it's useful in 2 ways. One, it limits how much permission you give yourself to prep, so that way you're not spending too much time on it, so that way you have time to get other things done. Also, if your players go and interrogate the business owner and you, the GM, know what's in the case or know why the case is important, then if your players just keep going after the business owner and keep pounding on them, there's always that chance that you're going to give them a little too much, right? You know everything. The business owner doesn't know everything, but you kind of just as you're playing forget, and you give them a little too much, and you give them a little bit too much of a clue, so that way they can skip a couple of these connections. But if you literally don't know, I have no idea what's in the case. I don't know why it's important. I maybe have a very vague notion of why the business owner wants it, right? The business owner wants the case because somebody's blackmailing them for it. Do they know who's blackmailing them? Nope. Could I give the players any clue as to who's blackmailing that person? No, because I don't know who the blackmailer is yet. And so your own ignorance as to what's going on is actually a tool when you're running these types of mysteries, because it prevents you from giving too much away. Because the way the players should get clues is by being active and leveraging their connections. And they've already found out the 5 or 6 other things, all of these other lines that is connected with the business owner by interrogating the business owner. They shouldn't find out stuff that skips over connections from the business owner. But again, I've done it a lot, all the time. I know the whole thing, and so I give them a little too much information at this point. So now they don't need to worry about the murder weapon, right? They don't need to find the murder weapon to investigate it and see that there's a mark on it, that it was made by this person, and they can go to that person and find out that this was a custom order for this gang member, right? And now they need to go talk to that gang member. Well, they already know X thing because I accidentally gave it away. And so they never ever go and engage with that element of the mystery. And so anything I had prepped for it, any cool stuff I had in mind, doesn't happen. Now, if your players do that on their own, right? They make that leap of logic and they figure something out and they have that epiphany moment and they connect the dots and they manage to skip over something because they were clever. Absolutely all for it. But I don't want them to do that because I, as the GM, gave up the cash. The other thing that not knowing allows you to do a lot easier is, like we talked about last week, when your players have that epiphany moment and they're like, I get it, I see it, I understand what's happening. If I've already got it set in stone, then it's just by nature of I already kind of made it, I don't want to throw it out. It's a little harder to say, actually, you know what? That thing they suggested is right. And it also means that you don't have to then like re-finagle a whole bunch of stuff. You just say, you know what? They're right. The hacker is blackmailing. Oh, the hacker is blackmailing the business owner. And now I can figure out how that connects in with everything else and blah, 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 blah. After the players had that epiphany, and I want to reward them and make them feel like they're actually solving the mystery. So I hope that was useful for folks. I did not see a whole bunch of questions in the chat while we were talking about it. If folks have any questions kind of after the fact or just didn't want to ask their questions while we were going through it, feel free to throw out a few. Yeah. So call in 1012, just like we were doing in chat, right? I think earlier you said that the fixer just left the case in the cabbie's taxi, right? That's better than the thing I was originally thinking up. So why not steal those ideas? And I've got an example of this that I still to this day am kicking myself about. I was running an Edge of the Empire game, and one of my players was part of basically a terrorist organization that was fighting for droid rights, and they were on a planet, and their fixer asked them to run security for this one corporation that was moving a prototype weapon from their factory to the spaceship. And the terrorists had asked the one player to build them a bomb. And then when the a completely unrelated gang attacked, right? That's why the corporation needed the extra muscle for security. One of my players went, "Oh my goodness. I the character don't know about this, but I the player know that your terrorist friends asked you for help. I bet these are your terrorist friends, and we're gonna have to now fight them. And now you're gonna be like, ugh, I don't want to shoot my terrorist friends." At that point, they weren't really friends. But I also don't want to get killed by them or let my crew get killed. But that wasn't it, right? And if I had been thinking about it better and I had been quicker on the take, I would have tossed out some of the stuff that I had already prepared and made that be the case, because that was a much better way to tie in and have the web twist on itself than the way that I originally prepped. And so if you don't have that stuff pre-prepared, then it's a lot easier to do that. Lunatic Design, did they take the bomb casing and fill it with pinball machine parts? No, they didn't. That would have been a very interesting thing for that player and a clever thing for that player to have been done, but they just kind of made the bomb for this terrorist organization they used to be a part of. And also, they had no reason to believe, because I didn't plant this, because I hadn't thought of this, they had no reason to believe that they were going to come into conflict with that organization. The way it actually played out was I kind of wanted it to be a consequence, but not a direct consequence, because we were still pretty early on in the game. And so the attack happened on basically the freeway they were going across at the same time, and it kind of ended the conflict with the people that were attacking their shipment, but didn't actually go after the players, because I at that time didn't want the consequences to be too harsh on the players, because we're still early on in the game and the players hadn't really, I was still cluing them into exactly how twisted and connected everything was. But so that was our bit on mysteries. Tomorrow we are doing, and this is why Design Corner happened today instead of in the usual time slot, we are doing our wrap-up stream for East Texas University Study Abroad, our campaign on Game on Tabletop. Let me check my calendar real quick so that I give you folks the right time. It is, so we're in Pacific time right now in Arizona, so it's 2 p.m. Pacific, so that is 5 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, I think. Yeah, because Mountain Standard Time's an hour later. Yeah, I see Landauer nodding. He's in Mountain Standard Time. So 2 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern. Actually, sorry, not Standard Time, Daylight Time. That's why the times are all weird and funky. We will be doing a closeout hangout stream with just a smattering of folks, right? Some folks that are just folks from PEG, some folks that have worked on various stages, East Texas University, study abroad. And then next week, we will be back with our regularly scheduled time and date for Design Corner. So Thursdays, uh, I just said the times, and it's the exact same times: 2 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Again, Daylight Time, not Standard Time. And I don't know what we're going to be talking about. I think I am going to throw out on a couple of different social medias a couple of options because we're kind of at this between point where I don't have anything that kind of continues to link into this topic we've been talking about because of study abroad coming out. And we haven't had any super interesting design discussions for anything else that we've been working on at the moment. So I think what I'll do is keep an eye out on the Savage World subreddit. We'll probably post it in the Facebook group, the Savage Worlds Facebook group, maybe on Twitter and Instagram, at least my Twitter. I don't know if I got to figure out how we're going to do this poll so that way it's usable in all these different scenarios. But look out for our social media, and we'll throw out a poll for a couple of different topics for Design Corner next week. And we will go based on what the group wants to talk about. Oh, that's oh. Okay, Colin 1012. It won't be next week because I'd have to think about that. But Colin 1012 said, I would like to see a design corner and things you thought would work but ended up not working and why. So I've got a question for you. Are you talking about in a running a tabletop game, in the session, something I prepped as a GM, or are you talking about design for a game? Because I could talk about both. Maybe it'd be a part A, part B design corner. But that'll certainly be an episode. I'd have to think about that one though. I don't want to leave that one as a both, right? Yeah, we'll put that in the hopper and do that at some point, but I'd have to think about that one. I wouldn't want to come in on Thursday and be like, okay, this is what the vote said and have to come up with it same day. But otherwise, check out our social medias and such, and I will see you folks later.